Just like your favorite music artist, Kirill Kaprizov continues to climb the charts in wild history in terms of points and goals and assists. How long will it take him to vault into the top 10? Plus, how do we rank the top 10 forwards in Minnesota Wild history? All that and more on today's episode of Locked on Wild.
You're Locked on Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is happening, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Locked on Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked on Wild your first listen each and every day. If this is your first time tuning into Locked on Wild, we welcome you on board. Make sure you take the time to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any new episodes as we move throughout the rest of the offseason into next season as well. If you're one of the everydayers that listens to this show on an everyday basis, we are glad to have you back. On today's episode of Locked on Wild, we take a look at the current history books for the Minnesota Wild in terms of points and how long it will take Kirill Kaprizov to pass particular players on his way up towards the top of the charts. We will also discuss the top 10 forwards in Minnesota Wild history with our Locked on Wild Ranks 'em segment as well. My name is Seth Topal, your daily Minnesota Wild insider, and we welcome you in on a Friday talking about points. Lots of points in Minnesota Wild history, although if you look at the all-time leaderboard for the Minnesota Wild since they came to be in 2000, all-time leader in terms of points is still Mikko Koivu with 709. That is it. I mean, it's a lot, but that is currently the gold standard for the Wild in terms of points. There's a sizable gap between Koivu and number 2 all-time, Marian Gaborik, with 437. Zach Parise slots in with an even 400. We like those even numbers. Makes the math easier. At third with 400 points. Then it's Jared Spurgeon in fourth with 379. Ryan Suter, 369 is fifth. Kirill Kaprizov slots in currently at 13th all-time with 234 total points. Now, that came in 203 total games. And so you look at what Kaprizov has done through the course of his career, and that has included a shortened season, albeit one where he was able to put up 51 points in 54 games. So you've got that. You have the 108 points 2 years ago. And then this past season, Kaprizov continuing to be right around a point per game player. Now, he did miss the final handful of games of the season, but still, looking at his numbers amongst franchise history, the 234 total points is still really impressive through his first 3 seasons. Now, in terms of goals, 114. He's still got a few players to pass on his way up to the top of the list, but not as many as you'd think. Currently behind Jason Zucker, Andrew Brunette, Zach Parise, and Marian Gaborik, as well as Mikko Koivu in terms of goals in franchise history. And what's it going to take? How long will it take for Kirill Kaprizov to pass some of these guys? Because I don't think there is any danger of him slowing down production-wise. Pretty darn good at scoring and creating points as well. So if you look at his career average, which per season is 78 points per season. So if you take that 78 and add it to 234, that puts you at 312, which would vault him all the way to passing Jason Zucker, who has 243 total points. So at the end of the season, he could be 9th all time if he ends up getting to just that benchmark right now, which for him has been on average 78 points. So that would vault him into 9th. Another 78-point season would put him at 390, which would put him all the way to 4th, behind just Zach Parise, Marian Gaborik, and Mikko Koivu. Now, that's assuming that Jared Spurgeon does absolutely nothing, but 78 points for 2 seasons would get Kirill Kaprizov into the top 5. Now, another 78-point season puts him at 468, which vaults him to number 2 behind Mikko Koivu. Another 78-point season puts him at 546. Another 624, and another 702. Just 7 points behind Mikko Koivu. And so if he continues that pace, I would imagine that by the time he's done with his current contract, Kaprizov that is, he should be within the top 5 in this franchise's history in terms of points, with just Gaborik and Parise to pass. If he signs another deal with the Wild after his current contract is up, well, then at that point, I would imagine he will be able to vault past Koivu and be able to stand alone. He's got all the single season records. Why not go for the all-time records for this franchise while he's at it as well? Now, that's points. In terms of goals, and we're just doing rough math here. I'm not an adept math wizard, so we're just doing the basic math just to try to kind of play this out and see where things go. So 114 goals for Kaprizov right now through his first 3 seasons, which averages out to 38 goals per season. So if we tack on another 38, that gets him to 152, which leaves him behind 3 players in Wild franchise history: Parise, Koivu, and Gaborik. If you add another 38 to that, that gets him to 190, which is still behind those 3 players. So he would need 3 seasons of 38 goals apiece to take the all-time franchise mark in terms of goals for career, which 3 seasons of 38 goals would put him at 228. Gaborik is sitting right now at 219. So again, that's just the benchmark. That's the average. There are going to be seasons probably that are a little below that, depending on, injuries, time missed. But it is exciting with Kaprizov that you feel like he is going to exceed those more as long as he's on the ice. He's going to exceed more than he misses, especially with these next couple of seasons. He's going to be relied upon more to lead this team with younger players filling roster spots. So it could be that it is shorter than that, but it is exciting because you look at the entire history of Minnesota Wild hockey from 2000 to now, 23 years. There haven't been a ton of guys that have been able to put themselves in this territory this quickly. I mean, Koivu achieved the numbers that he did from the amount of time that he played. A 15-year career that was pretty steady. And so he was able to accumulate the points that he did by the length at which he played for this organization. Kaprizov in 3 years, already in the top 15. 2 years from now, he's going to be in the top 10 and just continues to add to his numbers as he goes. So just found that fascinating. There were also some other fascinating things in looking at this leaderboard of all-time points for the Minnesota Wild. And so when we return, we will discuss just some of the oddities that we see in the top 10, in the top 15 of points in Minnesota Wild history. All that coming up here on Locked On Wild after this. Our next partner has a product that I use on an everyday basis. That, of course, is AG1. And let me just put it to you this way. A lot of you, I'm sure, are taking vitamins and supplements to try to help with some of the nutrients you're missing, trying to give you a little bit bigger boost throughout the course of the day. Me, I tend to crash over the noon hour. Before I started taking AG1, and it simplifies everything you're trying to do in the morning, whether it be taking a bunch of different multivitamins and supplements. All it takes is one scoop of AG1, and you're getting all of that and more. You're getting over 75 vitamins and nutrients in just a single scoop. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers comprehensive nutrients to support whole body health, and it costs less than $3 a day, which is less than that double venti latte that you get at your favorite coffee shop. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Again, drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out and start getting healthy today. Continuing today's episode of Locked On Wild, once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, make sure that you take the opportunity to subscribe and follow us on YouTube. Leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform as well. We always appreciate the feedback, and we'll continue with some of our off-season content here throughout the next couple of weeks. We'll be looking at some of the redrafts in NHL history that we started. We'll also be doing some more Locked On Wild rankums over the next few weeks as well. And then when we get to August, we are really going to start to ramp things up and move towards next season. We'll be doing player expectations. We'll be looking at line combinations and starting to really hone our focus in on next season coming up starting in August. So make sure to tune in for that as well. This all-time points list for the Minnesota Wild is interesting. Now, you look at it for points, it's Koivu on top, and those 709 points came in 1,028 career games. The crazy thing for me, I think, is that you look at a player like Brian Rolston, for example, 19th all-time in points for the Minnesota Wild with 202. He played 241 games, 3 seasons worth, still almost at 100 goals. He had 96 goals in 241 games. So his average season was over 30 goals per season. Again, for a franchise that's not been traditionally strong in scoring goals, having somebody come along to be able to do that is pretty rare. Also, I am fascinated by the fact that evidently Jason Pominville played here a lot longer than I thought he did. 327 career games with the Minnesota Wild. He had 206 total points. So that puts him 18th all time in Minnesota Wild history in terms of points in 327 games. A guy who you look at his seasons for the Wild, he did have a 30-goal season for Minnesota, but his next highest number of goals for the Wild beyond that was 18. He was more of a 13, 14, 15, 16 goal scorer and was between like a 35 and a 45 point player. So to be in the top 20 and be putting up those kinds of seasons just, again, really tells you what it takes to get onto this list for this franchise. Some other players, I did not realize that Spurgeon was as far up this list as he is. Those 379 points in 851 career games. Ryan Suter was 10 points fewer in 656 career games with this franchise. So that I find fascinating as well. You've, of course, got Andrew Brunette, who is 7th on the list with 321 career points, 119 goals, 202 assists. Other players like Charlie Coyle, Jason Zucker, some of that old guard, that Chuck Fletcher core, being on the list as high as they are, is interesting as well. And Kevin Fiala, 20th all time in points for the Minnesota Wild, with 186 in 215 career games. You have Brent Burns and Wes Walls just behind him with 183 and 182, respectively. If I look at some of the other numbers as well, again, Mikko Koivu pacing second, I beg your pardon, in power play goals in Wild franchise history with 60. But again, 1,000 games, that'll get you whatever number you want. Zach Parise, 9 ahead of him. Power play points, Koivu vastly outpacing the field in this one. He has 251 career power play points. And so this is just a perfect case study. Again, I feel like I'm hitting this point too many times. 1,000 games in the NHL will get you any point milestone you want. And so 251 total power play points is next closest is Marian Gaborik with 145. So that milestone is going to stand for quite a while for this franchise. Koivu is ironically not the leader in shorthanded goals. That is actually Wes Walls with 14 career shorthanded goals, which is interesting. Game winners is Marian Gaborik for right now. He's got 43. Kirill Kaprizov, though, has 14. So he's got some work to do in order to get to that top level. And the other thing that I'll mention as well, the 205 goals for Koivu came on 2,270 shots. 9% was Koivu's shooting percentage throughout the course of his NHL career. Kaprizov, on the other hand, he's shooting 16.1%. Marian Gaborik for his career shot 12.9%. And this is in Gaborik's case, 500 fewer shots, and still able to outpace in some of those statistics as well. This wasn't meant to be a Mikko Koivu bash session. It's just interesting to look at these statistics throughout the history of Minnesota Wild hockey and look at how these players got to their milestones. Some by way of longevity, some by way of just being really good for a short amount of time. I mean, on that same vein of Brian Rolston, how about Eric Stahl, who is 11th all-time in Wild history in points with 240, and he played in 311 career games with his franchise, able to rack up 111 goals, 129 assists. And so that has, it seems like, been the great dynamic for this team, is that you have guys that have been here forever. Koivu, great example. You had Parise and Suter here for quite a while. Spurgeon, Brodin, also in that same category. And then you kind of mix that with those guys that come in and they just light it up in quick fashion to take their place amongst Wild history. Now we're hoping that Kirill Kaprizov can be the first one to do both. Can be the first one to be here for a while also climbing the leaderboard in quick fashion. So time will tell, but as we laid out, it's not going to take him long to hop up into second place all time in Wild history in terms of stats. So we just get to sit back and watch him do his thing. Now, how will that impact the rankings? Locked On Wild ranks them. Top 10 forwards in franchise history as we finish today's episode of Locked On Wild after this. Final segment of today's episode of Locked On Wild. Once again, thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen each and every day. For the everydayers, you can tune in on Monday. Alex Micheletti will join the show, and we've got an interesting talker that we are going to discuss on Monday's show. If you signed a deal with the Minnesota Wild or a sports franchise, and you had the opportunity to put together a 5-team no-trade list, which 5 are on it? So we'll keep it NHL, but if either of us signed a contract with the Minnesota Wild, which 5 teams are we blocking trades to? So stay tuned for that coming up on Monday's show. All right, we're getting to the main course here. Locked On Wild ranks them, ranking the top 10 forwards. Now, we're leaving centers for a different day. So this is just forwards. Top 10 forwards in Minnesota Wild franchise history. Now, if you go just by stats and points, it should be Gaborik, Parise, Brunette, Zucker, Kaprizov, Niederreiter, Zuccarello, Pominville, Rolston, and Fiala, based off of points. That's not how we're going here. I think what I'm going to do is keep Gaborik at 1 for now, because I still have a soft spot for Gaborik being the first guy. We heard when we did the redraft of 2000's draft, still have a soft spot for him being the guy for this franchise, the first ever draft pick, and a guy who lived up to it, put up a ton of points. Yes, he was injured, but he played through that to put up points. He was prolific in the postseason as well. So I'm still going Marian Gaborik number 1, but Kirill Kaprizov is my number 2 because of how rapidly he's ascending the leaderboard. He is no question one of, on a very short list, maybe the most talented player this franchise has ever had. That's really not up for debate. And so until such time as Kaprizov passes Gaborik, I'm going to just continue to give the torch to Gabby for this one. So Gaborik, Kaprizov, 1 and 2. I will go Zach Parise 3rd because, again, he had some very prolific seasons while he was here. The postseason thing is another story, and Parise battled injuries himself as well. So I'm going to put Parise 3rd, put up a ton of points while he was here. And yeah, he was prolific despite not having the postseason success and, having some of the injuries to deal with as well. And I know it didn't end on a great note either, but still, he was prolific while he was here. Number 4 on this list, I mean, I think Andrew Brunette, still a very solid choice. He was a very, very good player while he was here. And the points speak for themselves. The goals speak for themselves. So I'm going him at 4. I'm going to go Zucker at 5. Zucker was a great goal scorer while he was here, part of that Chuck Fletcher core that hit their ceiling, and they could not get over that ceiling of being a playoff team, but not one. Well, I don't need to tell the story. We know the story. Teams that can get to the postseason but go no further. Zucker still very prolific, fan favorite. He was a fun player to watch while he was here. So he goes number 5 for me. After that, I'd probably go Nino because, again, he is currently 6th in points in this franchise. Actually, no, I'm going to go Rolston because he was here for shorter and still was able to be as prolific as he was. So 6 is Rolston. I'll go 7 Nino. Again, I don't need to get into the trade that maybe I should. The Nino for Victor Rask trade that still to this day is just it's blasphemous to even bring it up. And so I apologize to those who have a kind of a trigger warning for Victor Rask being mentioned. I didn't mean to set that off today. I didn't know we were going to go down that road. But Nino, still a very prolific player. He had some great postseason moments as well. So I'm going him 7. 8, I am going to go with Kevin. I'll go with Kevin Fiala 8. Again, really picked it up. Was a great player over the last couple of seasons for the Minnesota Wild. Zuccarello, I'm going to go 9. Has been good here as well over the last few seasons, but he was also injured and kind of just didn't really fit in over his first few seasons with the Minnesota Wild. And then for the 10th forward on this list, statistically, you could look at the likes of Jason Pominville. I suppose I should go that route. Statistically, he is 8th on the list all time in points. But I don't know. I wasn't a huge Pominville fan, if we're being completely honest. But I'll put him 10 because I think he still is above Marcus Foligno at this point and above Ryan Hartman too. So I'll go Pominville 10th as well. I know we're going to have some discussion on that list because there is certainly plenty of ways to interpret beyond those first few players. So let me know in the comments. Let me know if I'm out of my mind. Let me know if I'm on the right track. Give me your rankings as well. Rank the top 10 in Minnesota Wild history, and we will follow up with this on a later episode as well. But that will do it for today's episode of Locked On Wild. Again, thank you for tuning in each and every day of the week. If this is your first time tuning into Locked On Wild, we hope you take the time to subscribe on YouTube and your favorite podcast platforms so you don't miss out on any of our content throughout the rest of the off season. We have new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.